The rain fell heavy that December afternoon in Greenwich, Connecticut, the kind of cold rain that cuts through expensive coats and cheap jackets all the same. Michael Harrison sat in the back of his black Mercedes, staring out the tinted window as his driver navigated through the holiday traffic downtown. He was coming back from closing a deal worth $8 million, but his mind felt strangely empty. At 42 years old, Michael had everything the world said mattered: CEO of Harrison. Tech industries, penthouse overlooking Central Park, a different luxury car for each day of the week. But as the rain drummed against the window, he felt that familiar hollowness that no amount of success could fill. It had been there since he was 7 years old, since the day his mother disappeared. "Sir, there's quite a bit of traffic ahead. Road construction," his driver James said apologetically. "It's fine. Take the detour through downtown." As they turned onto a side street Michael rarely traveled, he saw her. At first, it was just another homeless person huddled in a doorway, trying to escape the rain. The city was full of them, especially this time of year. But something made him look twice. Maybe it was the way she held herself, even in that tattered coat. Maybe it was something deeper, something he couldn't name. "Stop the car," Michael heard himself say. "Sir, stop the car. Now." James pulled over, and Michael stepped out into the rain without even grabbing his umbrella. He walked slowly toward the doorway, his expensive shoes splashing through puddles. His heart was pounding, though he didn't know why. The woman looked up as his shadow fell across her. Her face was weathered, lined with years of hardship. Grey hair hung in wet strands around her face. She was thin, painfully so, wrapped in a coat that had more holes than fabric. But her eyes, those eyes were the color of warm honey, flecked with gold. Michael's breath caught in his throat. He knew. Those eyes, he had seen them every night in his dreams for 35 years. "Mom?" The word came out as barely a whisper. The woman's face went white. Her hands, clutched around a worn photograph, began to tremble. The photograph slipped from her fingers and fell to the wet pavement. Michael bent down to pick it up, and his world stopped completely. It was a picture of himself as a child, maybe 6 years old, smiling with missing front teeth. He was holding a toy truck, his favorite red truck, that he'd lost the same week his mother vanished. The photo was creased and faded, the edges worn soft from being held thousands of times. "Michael," her voice cracked, full of disbelief and something that sounded like fear. "Is it really you? Everyone said you were dead," Michael whispered, rain and tears mixing on his face. "The police, Dad, everyone. They said you died in a car accident. There was a funeral. I put flowers on your grave." The woman, his mother, began to cry silently, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Oh, my baby, my sweet boy, I never died. I've been here all this time, right here in this city." Michael felt his knees go weak. James had gotten out of the car and stood at a respectful distance, holding an umbrella, his own eyes wet with emotion. "Come," Michael said, his voice shaking. "Please, come with me." His mother hesitated, looking down at her filthy clothes, her broken shoes. "Michael, I can't. Look at me. I don't care what you look like." "Mom, please. I've been without you for 35 years. Don't make it 1 second longer." That night, in the penthouse apartment that overlooked a city of millions, Michael sat with his mother, wrapped in the softest blanket money could buy, holding a cup of hot tea with hands that still trembled. She had showered, and he'd given her one of his oversized sweaters and sweatpants. She looked small in them, fragile, but she was there, real, alive. "Tell me everything," Michael said, sitting across from her. "Start from the beginning." His mother, Margaret, he had to remind himself of her name after so long, took a shaky breath. "Your father and I, we were having problems. Bad problems. He was ambitious, always had been, but when his company started really taking off, he changed. There was another woman, someone from his office." Michael felt his jaw tighten. His father, Richard Harrison, had died 5 years ago. Michael had mourned him as the man who'd raised him alone after his mother's death. Now he wasn't sure what to feel. I found out about the affair. We had a terrible fight. I told him I wanted a divorce, that I'd take you with me. And Margaret's voice broke. He said I'd never win, that he had money, power, lawyers. He said if I tried to fight him, he'd make sure I never saw you again. So what happened? I was going to leave anyway. I was going to take you and run, start over somewhere. But the night before I planned to do it, I was in a car accident. A real one. I hit a patch of ice on the highway, spun out. I was in the hospital unconscious for 3 days. But the police, the funeral. When I woke up, there were 2 men in my hospital room. They said they worked for your father. They had papers, Michael, legal documents. They said Richard had already declared me dead, that there had been a closed casket funeral, that you'd already been told I was gone. They said if I ever tried to contact you or came near you, they'd have me arrested for abandonment and fraud. Michael stood up pacing, his hands clenched into fists. He faked your death. He gave me $10,000 in cash and told me to disappear. He said if I really loved you, I'd let you grow up with stability, with wealth, with opportunities. He said fighting him would only traumatize you more. Margaret wiped her eyes. I was young, Michael. I was scared. I had no money of my own, no family to help me. I thought maybe he was right. Maybe you'd be better off thinking my mother was dead. I know it was wrong, but I was so scared and I was injured, and those men, she shuddered. They weren't kind men, Michael. They made it very clear what would happen if I didn't cooperate. So what did you do? I took the money and left Connecticut. I went to Boston, found a small apartment, got a job waitressing. I told myself I'd get on my feet, save money, get a lawyer, and come back for you. But your father had people watching. Every few months someone would show up where I worked, just to remind me to stay away. Once, I tried to mail you a birthday card. 2 days later, someone broke into my apartment and destroyed everything I owned. Margaret's voice grew quieter. The years passed. I worked, I saved, but I was always looking over my shoulder. Then I got sick. I lost my job, couldn't afford my apartment. I ended up on the streets. At first I thought it would be temporary, but weeks became months, months became years. I moved back to Connecticut because I couldn't stay away. Even if I couldn't see you, I wanted to be in the same city. Sometimes I'd see articles about you in the newspaper, watch interviews on TV and store windows. I was so proud, Michael, so proud of the man you became. Michael sat back down, taking his mother's worn hands in his. Mom, you should have come to me. When I grew up, when I took over the company, how could I? By then it had been so long. You thought I was dead. You'd built a whole life without me. What right did I have to destroy your peace, to show up as this broken woman living on the streets? She gestured at herself. You had become so successful. I couldn't bear the thought of you seeing me like this, thinking your mother was crazy or a con artist or the woman who loved me enough to hold on to my picture for 35 years. Michael held up the photograph, now dried and sitting on the coffee table. Mom, I never stopped loving you. Never. Part of me always felt like something was wrong about your death. There were no details, no explanation that made sense. Dad would never talk about it. Over the next hours, as the rain continued outside and the city lights twinkled below, mother and son began to piece their lives back together with words. Margaret told him about the cold nights, the fear, the small kindnesses from strangers that kept her alive. Michael told her about his childhood, about the loneliness that wealth never quite filled, about building a company because he had nothing else to pour his energy into. I have to tell you something, Michael said, as dawn began to break over the city. Dad's company, my company now, is worth over $600 million. But I'd trade every penny of it to have had you at my 7th birthday party, to have had you see me graduate high school, to have you at my wedding. You're married. Michael's face grew sad. Was. Divorced 3 years ago. I wasn't very good at letting people close. I wonder why. There was no bitterness in his voice, only a kind of sad understanding. Margaret touched his face gently, the way she used to when he was small. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm sorry for all of it. I should have been braver. I should have fought harder." "You survived, Mum. That took its own kind of bravery." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Michael moved his mother into the guest suite of his penthouse and hired the best doctors in New York to examine her. She was malnourished, had untreated diabetes and several other health issues from years on the streets. But the doctors assured him that with proper care and medication, she would recover. He bought her new clothes, but she still kept the tattered coat from that rainy night, folded carefully in her closet. "So I never forget," she told him. "So I never forget what it's like to have nothing." Michael also hired a team of private investigators and lawyers. What they uncovered made him sick. His father had indeed orchestrated everything. The fake death, the closed casket funeral, the men who had threatened and followed Margaret for years. There were paper trails, payments to the thugs, forged documents. Richard Harrison had committed fraud on a massive scale, all to keep his wealth intact and his son under his control. He could have just divorced her like a normal person, Michael said to his lead lawyer, Daniel Martinez, as they sat in his office reviewing the documents. He had the money for any settlement. "It wasn't about money," Daniel said quietly. "It was about control and about his reputation. A messy divorce might have affected his business deals, his social standing. Your father was a man who cared very much about appearances." Michael thought about all the times his father had told him, "Harrisons never show weakness. Harrisons never fail. Harrisons always win." He felt sick. Can we do anything legally? Dad's dead, but the men he hired, some are dead. Some are in prison for other crimes. But there's one who's still around, worked as your father's private security for 30 years. Daniel slid a photo across the desk. His name is Vernon Walsh. Retired now, living comfortably in Florida on what I'm sure was a very generous pension from your father's estate. Michael stared at the photo of a man in his 70s, grey-haired and ordinary-looking. This man had threatened his mother, had broken into her apartment, had kept her in fear for decades. "I want to talk to him." "Michael, that might not be—" "I need to hear him say it. I need to look him in the eye." 2 weeks later, Michael flew to Florida with his mother and Daniel. Vernon Walsh lived in a retirement community in a modest but comfortable house. When Michael knocked on the door, the old man who answered looked genuinely surprised to see him. "Mr. Harrison? What are you—" "This is my mother, Margaret Harrison. You remember her, don't you?" The color drained from Vernon's face. He looked from Michael to Margaret, recognition and something like shame crossing his features. "I think you should let us in," Michael said calmly. "Unless you'd prefer we have this conversation with police present." Inside Vernon's neat living room, with photos of grandchildren on the walls and the smell of coffee in the air, the old man told his story. Yes, he had followed Margaret. Yes, he had threatened her. Yes, he had destroyed her apartment that one time. "I was following." "Orders," Vernon said, but his voice shook. "Your father paid well and I didn't ask questions. That's how it worked." "Did you ever think," Margaret said quietly, "about the woman you were terrorizing? Did you ever think about the child you were keeping from his mother?" Vernon couldn't meet her eyes. "I thought about it. More than you know, but I had a family too, bills to pay. And your husband, your ex-husband, he wasn't a man you said no to." "You could have said no," Michael said. "You could have been brave. You chose money instead." The old man nodded slowly. "You're right. I made my choices, and I've lived with them. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry." They left Florida without pressing charges. Vernon was an old man now, and Michael found he didn't have the appetite for revenge. But he did make sure Vernon understood that the generous pension he'd been receiving from the Harrison estate was immediately discontinued. Let him live his retirement on Social Security like everyone else, Michael said. Let him understand what it's like to worry about money in old age, the way Mum did. Back in New York, Michael and his mother began to build a new life together. She insisted on having her own apartment. "I need my independence, honey. I've been alone too long to share space all the time." So Michael bought her a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment just 3 blocks from his penthouse. Every Sunday, they had dinner together. Sometimes, it was at fancy restaurants where Margaret felt out of place in her new clothes, still not quite believing this life was real. Other times, it was in Michael's kitchen, where she taught him how to make the simple meals she remembered from his childhood. But more than just rebuilding their own relationship, something bigger was growing in Michael's heart. One night, 6 months after finding his mother, he called her and asked her to come to his office the next day. "I want to show you something," he said. "Bring your comfortable shoes." The next morning, they drove together to a building in the Bronx that Michael had recently purchased. It was a large, old church that had been abandoned for years. But now, construction crews were renovating it, and the sound of hammers and saws filled the air. "What is this?" Margaret asked. "It's going to be called Margaret's House," Michael said. "A shelter for homeless women. But not just a shelter. A real program. Medical care, job training, mental health services, legal aid. Everything you needed and couldn't get when you were on the streets." Margaret stopped walking, tears streaming down her face. "Michael, you're going to help me run it if you want to. You know what these women need better than any social worker or administrator. You've lived it. I don't know anything about running a program like this. You'll learn. We'll hire good people to help. But I want the women who come here to see you, Mom. I want them to see someone who survived, someone who made it through." Margaret's house opened 8 months later. It could accommodate 40 women at a time, providing not just beds and meals, but a pathway to rebuilding lives. Margaret was there every day, despite Michael's protests that she should rest, that she'd been through enough. "I spent 15 years wishing someone would help me," she told him. "Now I get to be that someone for other people. This isn't work, honey. This is healing." The stories of the women who came through Margaret's house were heartbreaking and hopeful in equal measure. There was Diana, a former teacher who'd lost everything to medical bills after her daughter's cancer treatment. There was Samantha, a veteran with PTSD who'd been sleeping in her car for 2 years. There was Rosa, who'd fled an abusive husband with nothing but the clothes on her back. One by one, they came to Margaret's house broken and afraid. And one by one, they began to heal. Diana got a job at a local school. Again, Samantha got into a program for veterans and found stable housing. Rosa learned bookkeeping and got hired at a small business. Michael watched his mother bloom in this work. The scared, traumatized woman he'd found in that doorway was still there. But now she was also strong, confident, purposeful. She spoke at fundraisers, telling her story to rooms full of wealthy donors. Some of them cried. All of them wrote checks. "Your mother is remarkable," his assistant Claire told him after one particularly moving speech. "She's changing the conversation about homelessness in this city." Michael smiled. "She's always been remarkable. The world just didn't know it." 2 years after that rainy day when Michael's life changed forever, Margaret's house had served over 200 women. The program had a 78% success rate for women finding stable housing and employment within a year. Other cities were reaching out, asking how to replicate the model. On the second anniversary of the shelter's opening, there was a celebration. The current residents prepared a meal, former residents came back to share their stories, and local politicians gave speeches about the importance of programs like this. Michael stood at the back of the room, watching his mother laugh with a young woman who'd just gotten her first paycheck from a new job. He thought about his father, about the empire of wealth and power Richard Harrison had built on lies and cruelty. And he thought about his mother who'd lost everything and built something real from the ashes. He knew which legacy he wanted to carry forward. That night, after all the guests had gone home and the building was quiet, Michael and his mother sat together in the small office she kept at the shelter. "Do you remember what you told me the night I found you?" Michael asked. "You said you'd wondered if I'd have been better off without you." Margaret nodded. her eyes sad. "I want you to understand something, Mom. I had every material advantage growing up. The best schools, the best opportunities, all the money I could ever need. But I was empty inside. I was successful and miserable. Do you know when I actually started to feel like my life had purpose? When? The day I found you in that doorway. The day I learned that love and loyalty matter more than quarterly earnings reports. The day I understood that real strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up." He gestured around the shelter. "You gave me this. You gave me a reason to use all that money for something that matters." Margaret took his hand. "You gave me my life back, honey. You gave me more than my life. You gave me purpose too. We gave each other everything that matters," Michael said. "That's what family does." Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm. Somewhere out there, other mothers and sons were separated by circumstances beyond their control. Other families were broken by greed or fear or simple cruelty. But here, in this building that used to be a forgotten church, hope was being rebuilt one person at a time. Michael thought about the rain that had fallen that December afternoon, washing over both luxury cars and doorways where the forgotten huddled against the cold. He thought about how close he'd come to driving past, to never stopping, to never knowing. Sometimes the most important moments in our lives come down to the smallest choices, the decision to look twice, the courage to say, "Stop the car," the willingness to believe that the impossible might be real. He'd found his mother, but in many ways, she'd found him too. She'd saved him from a life of hollow success and showed him what truly mattered. Together, they were building something neither of them could have built alone. A legacy not of wealth or power, but of compassion, second chances, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her son. As they walked out of Margaret's house that night, Michael's arm around his mother's shoulders, he realized something profound. His father had tried to erase her, to make her disappear, to win by any means necessary. But in the end, love had won, truth had won, and the legacy that would last wouldn't be Richard Harrison's fortune. It would be Margaret Harrison's courage and the lives she touched with her second chance at living. "I love you, Mom," Michael said as they reached the street. "I love you too, baby. I never stopped, not for one single day." And under the streetlights of the city that had witnessed both their worst moments and their redemption, mother and son walked home together at last.